Welcome back to another video. My name is Gordon Frayne, and today we're going to dive in to teach you all about Bitcoin's dirty little secret. Before we jump into the video though, please make sure to grab your free copy of my book, The Rise of Bitcoin. It is the first link in the description below. It is completely free. It is my gift to you, so make sure to go and grab it while it is still free. So click on that link. Now, as always, if you enjoy the content, please make sure to smash that thumbs up button. Hit the subscribe button as well. We're on the road to our first 10,000 subscribers, and it would mean the world. And hit that bell notification icon so you can get notified every time we drop a new video, so you can hit your crypto goals. So, jumping in to talk about Bitcoin's dirty little secret, what are we talking about here in the first place? Well, to set the stage, what we're going to look at here is US monetary supply, or USM2, just to zoom out and set the context here for what Bitcoin is achieving with year-over-year growth and as a hedge to inflation. So this is a graph basically representing all of the US dollars that have been printed and entering circulation over the past number of decades. And we're honing in on the US dollar here because it is acting as the world reserve currency as we speak. And we can see how the amount of dollars entering circulation has been increasing year over year, decade over decade. And we know that this US dollar is not backed by gold or any type of gold standard since the ending of the Bretton Woods Agreement in the 1970s. And as you can see, this very sharp rise here in the graph at the beginning of 2020 saw us go from about 15 trillion US dollars in circulation to almost $21 trillion in circulation today. That means that since 2020 alone, more than a quarter of all US dollars that have ever been in existence have been printed and entered into circulation in the past 4 years alone. That is a crazy statistic. That is a crazy amount of US dollars that have been printed and entered circulation. And it's no wonder that we're seeing inflation and hyperinflation as a result of that. If we zoom out and think about the S&P 500, for example, when we compare the S&P 500 and we actually level the playing field and account for returns and gains in the S&P 500, when we apply it to US monetary supply, the graph that we were just looking at, we actually see that when we account for all of the US dollars and inflation that has happened since the printing of the US dollar has been non-stop, this means that if you were to enter the S&P 500 all the way back in 1959 or 1960, you would only have seen a gain of about 29.82% from 1960 to 2024. Obviously, if you bought the dip at various stages, that would be a better return on investment. However, a 29% ROI over the course of about 60 to 70 years is very, very bad by anybody's metrics. So this is what the actual returns look like when we account for the amount of US dollars that have actually been entering circulation. And when we go over to Bitcoin and we actually map Bitcoin versus US monetary supply, so again, this is still accounting for the amount of dollars that have actually been printed and entered into circulation, we can see that over the past 10 years alone, Bitcoin has given us a 24 to 25,000% ROI versus USM2, again, when we level the playing field and account for the variable that is trillions of US dollars entering circulation. So again, a 10-year time span, we've got a plus 25,000, almost 26,000% return on investment when we account for M2 versus a 29% ROI over the course of 60 years when we compare the S&P 500 and account for US monetary expansion. So why do we say all this, and why are we even mentioning this? Well, Bitcoin is serving as the best possible hedge against inflation and against the amount of monetary supply that is entering circulation. And we're going to hone in here to show what happens when we actually kind of shift the paradigm and begin to think about how we could be moving towards a Bitcoin standard, or moving towards a world where we have to shift our thinking into a different mindset and viewing the world through the lens of a Bitcoin standard when we begin to think about prices in Bitcoin and how that can actually affect us moving forward. And for those of us who actually, have taken the time to understand Bitcoin, this may not be news to you, but for people who are yet to kind of make that paradigm shift in their own head, this might be pretty insightful. So what we see here is a graph basically of US medium home prices from 1963 through 2023. So basically the increase in the average house price in the USA over the past number of decades. And obviously, thanks to inflation and all of the monetary printing that we've seen over the past number of decades, the average house price in the US has continued to trend upwards. So we're going to look at a couple of examples here in a moment, but this isn't specific to the US either. We know that the US dollar is acting as the world reserve currency, but the countries with the biggest house price increases in 2020 saw other countries that you might be living in, for example, Turkey, New Zealand, Slovakia, Russia, Luxembourg, Poland, etc. They all saw median house price increases greater than the average increases in the US, for example. Poland saw 11%, Luxembourg 13%, Russia 14%, Slovakia 16%, New Zealand 18.6% increases, and Turkey are seeing huge debasement of their currency in recent years, leading to median house prices going up over 30% in that period of 2019 to 2020, for example. So again, we're using the US housing market as an example here, but this is very, very relevant to every country around the world because we're continuing to see currency debasement. And again, this graph here is showing us how Bitcoin has been putting in new all-time highs very recently here in May 2024 across all of these different currencies around the world. So depending on where you live, whether it's Bolivia, whether it's Cameroon, whether it's Canada, Chile, Cuba, Denmark, Dominican Republic, Egypt, Algeria, Bitcoin has been putting in new all-time high prices in all of these currencies. That's showing us that despite Bitcoin putting in an all-time high a few weeks ago in US dollars, it has dipped back below its all-time high, whereas in other currencies, it's continuing to make new all-time highs time and time again because all of those currencies themselves have even debased further against the US dollar, and the US dollar is getting debased further and further versus Bitcoin, as we will see now in a moment. So again, this is a macroeconomic situation that we're just trying to portray here when it comes to currency debasement, and the value of the money that you're earning is going less and less further every single year. So going back to this graph here about US medium home prices, what we see here is obviously the average house price continuing to trend upwards over the past number of decades. We're going to call out a couple of quick examples here, and the first example we're going to look at is house prices in March 2011. Again, this data is taken from the graph above that we just saw, but the average price for a home in the US in March 2011 was around 220,000 US dollars. This price, denoted in Bitcoin at that time, would have been the equivalent of about 250,000 Bitcoin needed to purchase a home in the US in March 2011. At that time, in March 2011, the price of one Bitcoin was 88 cents. You're going to see the trend evolve here as we continue to go through this, but when we move as far as March 2015, so just 4 years later, what we see here is that the median house price in the USA increased from 220,000 to about 300,000 US dollars. However, the interesting thing to note here now is the fact that the amount of Bitcoin it would have taken you to purchase a home in the US just 4 years later has dropped by a factor of almost 250, because in March 2015, it would only have costed you roughly 1,013 Bitcoin to purchase a home in the US for this price, the average of 300,000, because by March 2015, one Bitcoin was equal to $296.21. You might see where we're going here, but basically 4 years later, by the time we reached March 2019, the average house price in the United States was again up to 330,000. However, the number or the amount of Bitcoin that was required in order to purchase this house dropped once again by a factor of over 10. And in 2019, it would only have cost you 85.27 Bitcoin to purchase a home in the United States, because Bitcoin reached a price of $3,870 by the time we got to March 2019. Finally, moving on even further, this number should actually be March 2023. 4 years later, once again, we saw significant increases in the average price of a US home, largely thanks to those $5 trillion that we saw printed in 2020, thanks to that C19. But we have an average home price in the USA of about $440,000 US dollars. However, this should be March 2024. We've gotten to an average home price of about $440,000 US dollars. However, the amount of Bitcoin required to purchase a home for the average home in the United States drops once again to 6.12 Bitcoin, because as of March 2024, we saw Bitcoin prices hitting the 71,000 US dollar mark. So what you can see here, if we zoom out and think about the macro trend that is happening here, there's obviously tons of other stuff happening in the background, with Bitcoin being the best form of sound money that we've ever seen, and how Bitcoin is continuing to act as a better store of value versus the US dollar, and tons of different things happening in the background that you can check out other videos on the channel for. But the main point of this video is to help you make this paradigm shift in your own mind, to understand how Bitcoin is almost acting as a deflationary asset. And if when you move into a Bitcoin standard or a Bitcoin world, everything becomes cheaper year over year versus everything getting more expensive year over year when you're operating on a US dollar standard. Because as we can see, the median house price in 2011 would have cost you 250,000 Bitcoin. By March 2015, it would only cost you just over 1,000 Bitcoin. By March 2019, we were down to 85 Bitcoin. And by March 2024, we're just above 6 Bitcoin for the average house price of a house in the United States. And again, we gave you examples here. This is not just relevant to the United States. This is happening all over the world because of currency debasement and because of the amount of inflation happening across different markets for housing prices, thanks to that currency, that fiat currency debasement. So again, when you begin to make this shift, or this paradigm shift towards a Bitcoin standard, or by purchasing Bitcoin yourself and thinking about how you can denominate certain assets in Bitcoin, you begin to see a trend here that month over month, year over year, everything gets cheaper for you when you're operating on a Bitcoin standard, versus everything continuing to increase or inflate when you're operating on a fiat currency standard. So that is the main point that I wanted to make in this video. As always, this is not financial advice, but if you can zoom out and look at the big picture here, and again, that's why we started off by showing you this graph of all of the money entering circulation here and the amount of US dollars that are being printed over the past number of decades, and then how Bitcoin is still acting as a hedge versus USM2 and the amount of money entering circulation. You're still getting almost a 26,000% ROI in the past 10 years alone. This number is much bigger if you go back to the inception of Bitcoin, but 25,000 in the past 10 years alone. And then apply that Bitcoin standard to assets or how you're operating in the real world. You can see how when you're operating on this Bitcoin standard, for you, everything is going to get cheaper year over year as we move into the future. So I hope you enjoyed that video. It was just a little bit of a snapshot to help you think about how the paradigm shift is a change in how you perceive the world, but also how Bitcoin helps you to achieve a future where assets and resources and goods and services become cheaper and cheaper for you over time when you're operating on a hard, sound monetary standard like Bitcoin. As always, if you enjoy the content, please make sure to smash that thumbs up button below, hit that subscribe button, and hit that bell notification icon. Please don't forget to grab your free copy of my book, The Rise of Bitcoin. It is the first link in the description below. It's 100% free. You're going to get a PDF copy. It's my gift to you. It's not going to be free forever, so please make sure to grab it while it is free so that you can understand all of this new paradigm in your own terms and on your own time. And as always, we will catch you in the next video.